Wrestling is a sport dominated by big people. Many wrestlers are physically big and are great characters. In the heyday of wrestling as a spectator sport, these wrestlers became household names, enjoyed the support of loyal fans, and saw their faces on all sorts of merchandise. Andre the Giant was a massive man in a world of massive men. He became a world champion, a legend in his sporting lifetime, and an actor. He traveled the world to feature in wrestling events and so became a familiar face to many people. So, who was Andre the Giant and what made him such a successful wrestler? Let's find out. Andre's childhood in France. Andre was born in France in 1946. His parents had both moved there from Eastern Europe, his father from Bulgaria and his mother from Poland. His full name was Andre René Roussimoff, and he was one of 5. None of his siblings showed signs of the gigantism that Andre displayed. After leaving school, Andre chose not to continue in higher education, but instead worked on his father's farm. Doubtless his size and strength were useful when there was heavy work being done. At the age of 12, Andre had reached 6'3" and had more growing yet to come. He did an apprenticeship as a woodworker and also worked in a factory that made farm machinery. But he was restless, and when he reached 18, he left home to live in Paris. Here he was spotted by wrestling promoter Robert Legate, who introduced him to the sport. When he first began wrestling in and around Paris, he appeared as Giant Fer. He was quickly noticed by a Canadian wrestling promoter called Frank Valois, who soon was capitalizing on Andre's size and abilities. He began touring other countries, including the UK, Australia, Germany, and Japan. In Japan, he wrestled under the name Monster Roussimoff, and it was here he learned he was suffering from a hormonal disorder called acromegaly. What is acromegaly? Acromegaly comes about when the pituitary gland produces an excess of growth hormones. Today, the problem can be tackled by surgery if the cause is a tumor on the pituitary gland. In the past, medication has been used and still is today where it's felt to be the better option. In Andre's case, we don't know whether he received medication. It seems unlikely. Sufferers from acromegaly can expect their life expectancy shortened by about 10 years. Andre's wrestling career takes off. Between 1966 and 1973, his career was blossoming. He was undertaking tours in various countries, being especially popular in Japan. While wrestling for International Wrestling Enterprise, he took to tag team wrestling. He became a tag team champion, partnering with Michael Nador. In 1971, Andre moved to Montreal and soon became immensely popular there. He appeared in front of sellout crowds, but there was a downside. It wasn't long before he had run out of suitable opponents. As the novelty of a large wrestler wore off, the fans stayed away. His manager approached Vince McMahon Sr., who had founded the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, about signing Andre. Andre adopted the nickname Andre the Giant around this time. McMahon signed Andre in 1973 as a face or fan favorite to the WWF. This made Andre a good guy who stuck to the rules and played fair at all times. The fans loved him, and he remained a favorite through the 70s and into the early 80s. Although he had a few defeats during this time, Andre was largely undefeated for some 15 years. Through the 80s, Andre was involved in a number of well-publicized feuds with other wrestlers. He first feuded with Hulk Hogan in the early 80s, which resulted in showdowns between them in the US and in Japan. Whereas Hulk Hogan had been a villain to Andre's face in earlier matches, these late 80s events saw the tables turned, with Andre as the villain and Hogan as the face. Such antics were common in pro wrestling, as attempts to get the fans of both men excited and keen to witness their matches. By the late 80s, various feuds with other wrestlers had been orchestrated by promoters to increase reaction from fans. Wrestling was at its most popular across the world at this time, with an enormous range of merchandise being offered to fans. TV coverage was growing, and youngsters collected trading cards, hung posters in their bedrooms, and emulated their heroes in playgrounds across the globe. Andre commanded a vast and loyal following, as did Hulk Hogan and other top wrestlers. However, Andre was getting older, and his health was suffering. Younger challenges were coming up through the game, and new feuds with them began to appear. In 1989, he teamed up with Haku to form the tag team The Colossal Connection. Together, they made it clear they were going to beat the existing WWF Tag Team Champs, Demolition. The Colossal Connection beat them to win all their titles, but then promptly lost the titles to the former champions at WrestleMania 6 in 1990. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Factsverse, and keep watching for more about Andre the Giant. The 90s. After a year of inactivity due to an injury, Andre returned to the ring in 1991. A month later, he was back in Detroit for a battle royal that proved to be his last match for WWF. The next few months saw him involved in a series of ringside spats with other wrestlers. When the wrestler Earthquake managed to injure Andre's knee, it put him on crutches. The last few years of Andre's wrestling career were spent in Japan with the All Japan Pro Wrestling and in Mexico with the Universal Wrestling Association. His last wrestling match was in Japan in December of 1992. Andre the actor. Parallel with his wrestling career, Andre enjoyed a successful career as an actor. In 1967, he appeared as a fighter in a French boxing film. He played Bigfoot in his first U.S. TV acting role. He played the part in 2 episodes of The $6 Million Man in 1977. In 1978, he appeared in a French-Canadian sitcom called Symphorian, and in 1981 in Les Brillantes, another Quebec TV sitcom. Also in 1981, Andre appeared in an episode of BJ and the Bear. The following year, he played Monster in 1 episode of The Greatest American Hero. In 1984, he made his first appearance in a Hollywood movie, in Conan the Destroyer with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Wilt Chamberlain. Andre also appeared as himself and was credited as Andre Rosimov in Mickey and Maude. His favorite role, however, was in the 1987 film The Princess Bride, and is probably his best known. He played Fezzik, the giant from Greenland who had a major role in the film. Andre found playing Fezzik a most enjoyable and satisfying experience, especially as no one treated him as a freak during filming. His last film role was a cameo appearance as the circus giant in Trading Mom, which was filmed in 1993 but released in 1994, the year after he died. Andre the Man. Andre never married, although he did have a daughter as a result of a relationship with John Christensen, who worked in the wrestling world. His daughter is named Robin Christensen, and she inherited his entire estate on his death. For relaxation, Andre would head to the ranch he owned in Ellerbe, North Carolina. 2 friends managed it for him, but he would spend time there wherever he could. Andre had a reputation as a drinker and would down prodigious amounts of beer at one sitting. He could drink well over 100 beers in a session with little effect. He did on some occasions pass out and due to his size could not be easily moved. At the time of his death, Andre was estimated to be worth around $10 million. He was known to be a very generous man and wealth was not something he craved. He was also known to enjoy paying restaurant bills even when he was a guest rather than the host. Andre's death. Andre's sheer size meant his health was compromised, particularly in later life. He endured back surgery at one point to enable him to continue wrestling. He suffered joint pain and discomfort and eventually retired from wrestling. In early January 1993, Andre's father died, and Andre made arrangements to travel to France to attend his funeral. He remained there for a few days longer to spend time with his mother. On the night of January 26th, he succumbed to congestive heart failure and died in his hotel room. He was 46. His body was flown back to the U.S. to be cremated and his ashes were scattered at his ranch in North Carolina. Andre the Giant was a huge man and a huge character. He was gentle, kind, and caring. What was your favorite part about Andre the Giant? His wrestling or his acting? Let us know in the comments. And before you go, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.